And next we are going to have JD Brown join us. JD is a senior associate in policy and planning with Second Nature Ecology and Design. He's located in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he's going to be talking about catalyzing biodiversity on buildings. JD, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the wonderful presentations that we've seen already. I know there's going to be a lot of really wonderful information shared over the next 2 days. My background is in policy and law, and I work with a group called Second Nature Ecology and Design. We're a team of scientists, planners, and a lawyer, a recovering lawyer, that's myself. And we work to create high quality, ecologically biodiverse landscapes in urban areas. And we work with a variety of different clients and organizations and communities to do that. One of the projects that sorry, I'm just going to go to my previous slide here. One of the projects that we worked on with IUCN and Wholesome, which is a recycled concrete manufacturer in Europe, is looking at policies and opportunities to incorporate biodiversity and greening and really high quality biodiverse environments into the building scale. And when we're talking about buildings scale here, we're really looking kind of at the building envelope, thinking about green walls, other measures to really bring biodiversity specifically into that building structure. So obviously there's lots of policies that we're interested in that are happening in between the buildings and connecting to the larger landscape. But this report was specifically focused on kind of what are the policies that we see globally, as well as what do we see in 8 cities that we did a deeper dive into and had the opportunity to talk with staff from those cities to find out what they were doing in terms of the range of different programs and policies that they have in place. And so the place that we started for this report was thinking about what are the different drivers that are bringing this to the forefront. So, why would building owners be interested in incorporating biodiversity into the buildings? And there's lots of different scales of kind of what's moving this forward. So starting at the very highest scale in terms of the global, we're looking at the Global Biodiversity Framework and specifically Target 12, which talks about enhancing green spaces and incorporating that into the urban environment specifically, both for human well-being and for biodiversity. And that translates to regional approaches like the EU Nature Restoration Law. So member states right now are taking stock of what exists in their countries in terms of biodiversity and spaces to support biodiversities. And there's also a specific focus on what does that mean for urban areas as well. And so after taking stock, the goal will be starting in 2031 to have a no net loss of urban green space. And so for some of these highly dense European cities, what does that mean in terms of integrating urban green into the buildings and infrastructure? At the national level, examples like the UK Biodiversity Net Gain, which has been adopted and applies across the country there. What does that specifically look like in the urban environment in particular? So many urban spaces are starting at a lower level in terms of the biodiversity they have in place. The BNG also provides opportunities to, if you're not able to bring biodiversity to the specific area, to offset that through gains elsewhere. So there's definitely some kind of evolution that needs to take place in terms of what this might look like for urban areas, but I think we'll see that as a driver, continuing conversations for the UK and places implementing similar policies. At the subnational level, we see things like the Berlin Nature Pact, which is a multi-city agreement to pursue a variety of different biodiversity aims, including for public buildings, adding bird habitat and bird safe protection, as well as addressing public night glow. So two of the principal drivers of what we'll be talking about over the next 2 days. There's also drivers that are moving companies forward. So there's all sorts of global impact reporting frameworks that, for the most part, are looking at a really large scale of thinking about what's the footprint of these companies. But I think it's reasonable to expect that these frameworks will evolve to have a kind of finer grain view and include things like what's happening at the building landscape. And I think, especially when these companies start to address these kind of larger environmental footprints that they're having, one of the things that they will be taking into consideration is what does that mean at the very local level? And then there's all sorts of building certification standards. So building owners really want to have those certifications. There's a variety, and I include them here kind of in list form of potential standards that can apply to support better greening initiatives. You know, everything from biodiverse habitats to light pollution reduction, water efficiency, things like that. I think all of those can be harnessed and drive forward better projects. And so, what does this look like when we start to think about kind of on a city by city basis? And Paris was really helpful in terms of communicating approach that they are thinking about, which is supporting these regulatory efforts with both the regulations, but also the financial and technical incentives, as well as the data collection and the tools necessary to understand if you're making progress over time. So I think what you'll need, as much as we want to see those financial and technical incentives, you still need that regulatory baseline. I think if we want to scale up these approaches and move them forward, we always have the opportunity to alleviate those burdens for that individual building owner with the financial and technical tools to help them move these projects forward. But we also want to have the regulations in place. And so there's lots of different examples. This is a table from the report that is looking at these 8 case study cities. And to get the details of that, you can look at the report itself. But, we're thinking about exactly where in the city do regulations apply? Are they mandatory, voluntary? All sorts of different aspects. What I wanted to focus on today are 2 pieces of this. One is specifically how do these greening incentives focus on biodiversity? So it's not just greening, it's also thinking about, well, how do we have high quality nature environments in cities and all the benefits that those provide? And then when we are creating these biodiverse environments on buildings, how are we also protecting the wildlife, including birds, that we are inviting into those spaces? And so those are 2 specific pieces of kind of what we looked at in this report. So on the inviting biodiversity side of things, we know that there's a clear difference with the design choices that we make with greening on buildings. To what extent are we incorporating native plants? Habitat support like bird houses, soils that are deep and can support these diverse plantings, as well as thinking about what's the connectivity with the surrounding environment. And one to highlight is Basel. So doing a wonderful job in not only encouraging the creation of green roofs, but also thinking about, well, what's the design choices that are going into making those green roofs? So encouraging the use of local soils and deep local soils at that can support a variety of vegetation on the roofs. And they also have technical guidance and incentives that are tied into better design choices. So higher subsidies for more biodiverse supporting choices. And then the other side of that, which will really the focus for everyone here over the next 2 days, is how do we minimize the risks for the wildlife that we're inviting into those spaces? And so San Francisco Bird Safe Guidelines is standards is one example that I'm sure lots of us are familiar with. So thinking about one, minimizing, when possible, those glazed and reflective surfaces, especially in proximity to areas that we know that birds are using, that are urban bird refuges and other areas in cities where we know birds are moving through. And then, as we heard, just heard from Brendan, and then we'll be hearing from our next speaker as well, what are the opportunities to reduce those reflective surfaces? And also, we heard from Michael on the dark sky 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting. I use these when communicating with clients to talk about what's an ideal strategy for lighting for your communities or your cities. And generally, this goes to having no more light than is needed to serve the purpose for what it sets out for. So, great presentation from Michael on that. So ideally, we would have policies that do both, that both invite biodiversity in, and that also minimize the risk for wildlife. And so the Toronto Green Standard, which I like to say is the gold standard, because it does both. It both encourages green roofs and supports them, and has a stated preference for promoting biodiversity on those green roofs, as well as being a leader in terms of bird collision standards and protections. And then it's just been a wonderful incremental approach over time. So with stakeholder consultation, they started at a first kind of voluntary level. And then when there was widespread adoption of that, they moved that up to become the new floor. And they have this voluntary level that keeps increasing, and the floor keeps increasing over time. So we really just see this incremental improvement, which is just an absolute wonderful policy program. So thinking specifically about some of the European cities that we had the opportunity to talk with and learn more about their programs, Barcelona has a few really awesome technical guidance programs that it utilizes in leading in terms of what it's doing with its own public buildings, and then has a competition where it's developing programs across the city to show what's possible and exploring different design options, recognizing that there's not a one size that fits all for biodiversity on buildings. Berlin, a creator of the Green Factor program, which has been adopted by many other cities, originally thinking about, well, how do we make landscapes that are absorbing and treating water, stormwater, but has also evolved over time to think about, well, we want these landscapes to be more multifaceted. What about habitat creation and biodiversity as well? They have a national law that protects birds. And how does that apply to buildings specifically with known high rates of collisions as well as light trespass? And then Paris was a wonderful example as well, because they, again, are looking at those 3 prongs, which I think are really necessary if we want to have successful policy programs. They are thinking about the regulatory side of things, so requirements for new construction in terms of the greening levels, as well as what that greening looks like in terms of native biodiversity, as well as surfaces that minimize bird collisions. And then they are thinking about, well, realistically, what does that mean with the existing landscape? So Paris, a city with many historic buildings, and they have a pilot program, which the visuals are here from that pilot program about their Mansard roofs and how to kind of make the green roofs compatible with that. And then they have this kind of collection of tools that help designers who are designing new buildings to think about what are the design choices that they would be making that are going to benefit biodiversity, and then tying to that technical and financial support for the decisions that are made. So more support for better design choices, much like Basel that I talked about before. And then I'll leave you with kind of the next step for us, which is, we understand all of these programs and policies that are in place. And there's lots of literature out there about the impact of design choices that we are making in terms of providing all of these benefits that we see on the left here. What we are working on now is a tool to help communicate when we make these design choices, we can have these multifaceted roofs that are bringing in not just the greening that we see, but also the biodiversity benefits and the human health and climate benefits as well. So that's next for us in working with these partners. So thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity to join you all.